The airport moved like a living creature, restless and loud, people dragging rolling suitcases, shoes tapping against the polished tile, families corralling children, business travelers glued to their phones muttering into headsets, and the overhead speakers filling the air with a constant stream of boarding calls and security reminders. It was chaos. The kind of everyday chaos people learn to tune out, but in the middle of it all stood a man who carried a weight far heavier than the bags clattering. Across the floor, Colonel David Carter, decorated United States Army officer, his uniform pressed sharp, his shoes polished until they caught the light, his chest decorated with ribbons earned not for show, but for sacrifice. On the tarmac outside waited the casket of Private First Class. Jason Reynolds, just 21 years old, gone too soon. Wrapped in the American flag, Carter had escorted many soldiers home before, but something about today pressed heavier on his chest. Perhaps it was the youth of the man whose final journey he carried. Perhaps it was the stillness of the casket against the restless noise of the terminal. Or perhaps it was the unseen storm that waited for him only a few steps ahead. He approached the airline counter with the same calm precision he carried into every mission, his identification ready. His military orders prepared. The agent behind the desk did not look up at first, her fingers tapping against the keyboard with practiced indifference. But then she paused. Her eyes flicked up to him, then quickly away as though seeing something she wished she had not. She asked for his papers again, her voice tight. Carter handed them back. Her smile forced her eyes unsettled. "I am sorry, sir," she said, "but there appears to be an issue with your ticket. You cannot board this flight." Carter kept his composure, though his heart clenched. His mission was clear, his orders valid. Yet here he was being told no. He leaned in, his voice steady, professional. "What is the issue?" She replied with a single word, the word that people use when they want to end questions. "Policy," she said. "Security protocol." Carter repeated her words slowly. "What policy?" His tone calm but sharp enough to cut through the noise of the terminal. Her gaze flicked sideways toward another agent. Her smile stiffened and she repeated it. "Is just policy." The line behind Carter grew restless, whispers rising, passengers shifting their weight, eyes glancing toward the uniformed man at the counter. But Carter stood rooted, shoulders squared, his presence commanding without a raised voice. "This is not a personal trip," he said. "This is duty. My documentation is valid." But still, the answer was no. The woman at the counter shifted uneasily, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as if the letters might suddenly rearrange themselves into an excuse strong enough to justify what she was saying. Her coworker leaned in, whispering quickly, both of them stealing nervous glances at the soldier standing before them. The line behind Carter began to quiet people, noticing the tension, noticing the uniform, noticing the wrongness of it all. A supervisor finally stepped forward, a man with tired eyes and a badge clipped crooked to his jacket. His tone was professional, but carried that smooth, rehearsed quality people use when they want to end a conversation before it starts. "I apologize, sir," he said, "but there is nothing we can do at this moment. We are following standard procedures." Carter held his ground shoulders, steady breath controlled. He had been in boardrooms with politicians who talked in circles. He had been in war zones where excuses could mean lives lost, and he knew what was happening here. This was not policy. This was not procedure. This was dismissal. Cloaked in polite words, he spoke evenly. "I have escorted soldiers home. Before there is no regulation that prevents me from boarding this flight, you need to tell me the real reason." The supervisor shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening, his eyes. "Refusing to meet Carter's directly, sir. It is nothing personal." He said, "It is simply the rules." Carter let the silence stretch heavy around them until the words felt hollow. Behind him, passengers stirred. A man in a baseball cap muttered under his breath. A woman in a red jacket whispered to her husband, "The soldier is being denied a flight, even though he carries orders." The murmurs began to ripple outward like waves hitting the walls of the terminal. Then another voice rose, firm, clear, carrying a lifetime of authority. A man further back in line, older. Weathered face eyes sharp beneath a USMC cap. He stepped forward slightly, his voice cutting through the growing tension. "Are you telling me this is about clearance because I have walked through airports in uniform more times than I can count, and never once have I seen a soldier escorting a fallen brother stopped like this. So tell us what is really going on." The supervisor faltered, glancing nervously at the counter staff at the phones. Beginning to appear in passenger hands, people recording, people watching the mood, had shifted no longer. Just another minor delay at a crowded airport, this was becoming a moment. Carter remained calm, but inside, he noted every detail, every hesitation, every excuse. He would not give them the satisfaction of anger. His mission was clear. Jason Reynolds needed to get home. The crowd was no longer passive. They were witnesses, and the air felt charged as if something larger than a ticket was now on. Trial right here at the counter of a busy American airport. The crowd thickened behind Carter, the murmur of voices rising, the tapping of keys at the counter, stalling the supervisor pretending to check systems, but really searching for a way out, a way to hide what was already too visible. The agent who had first spoken to Carter kept her head down, pretending to study the glowing screen in front of her, but her hands shook slightly, betraying the calm mask she tried to hold. Carter stood silent, his back straight, his eyes fixed not on the agent, not even on the supervisor, but on the space ahead. The way a man focuses on a mission, he knew excuses when he heard them, and this was no different. They were waiting for him to break, for him to raise his voice, to lose control so they could call security and twist the story. But Carter would not give them that. Instead, he let the silence work for him. Then a young woman, maybe 25, maybe younger, stepped out of line, a phone held steady. In her hands, her voice was quiet but firm enough to carry across the waiting area. "I just want to be clear," she said. "They are refusing to let you board, even though you are escorting a soldier home." Carter turned slightly, his voice calm. "Yes, that is correct." The young woman nodded and turned her phone toward him. "I am live streaming," she said. "People need to see this." Her voice trembled, but not from fear, from conviction that she was doing the right thing. That single spark set the crowd ablaze. Another passenger lifted his phone, then another and another. The glow of screens pointing toward the counter multiplying until half the line was recording whispers turned to sharp words. "This is wrong. Someone said this man is in uniform doing his duty." Another voice rose louder. "Let him fly." The Marine veteran who had spoken earlier folded his arms, his voice steady but carrying weight. "I have buried brothers. I have saluted caskets, and I will not stand here quietly while one of our own is denied. Dignity. This is a disgrace." The words hit the air. Heavy, undeniable passengers who had stayed silent shifted uncomfortably, some nodding, some muttering agreement. The airline staff could feel the tide turning against them. The supervisor rubbed his. Temple glanced toward the back as if begging for rescue. But no one came. The moment dragged like a rope stretched too tight until finally he muttered something about checking further and disappeared behind a frosted glass door, leaving the young agent frozen at the counter. Carter never moved, his presence alone anchored the room, and around him the people watched, waited, recording, documenting what was no longer a private insult but a public act of disrespect. The silence of the uniform, the weight of the flag-draped casket waiting outside the eyes of strangers turned witnesses. It was no longer just about a boarding pass. It was about something deeper, and the truth of that was spreading faster than any plane on the runway. The air inside the terminal shifted like a storm about to break. Passengers pressed closer, not pushing but leaning in, drawn to the center of gravity where the soldiers stood tall at the counter. The young woman's live stream climbed in viewers. By the second, the glow of hearts and comments scrolling across her screen too fast to read. Another man muttered, "It is trending already," and people craned their necks to see. Carter kept his eyes steady, his jaw firm, the years of discipline evident. In every quiet movement he did not argue, he did not plead, he simply stood as though the weight of silence itself carried more authority than raised voices ever could. The uniform spoke for him. the ribbons on his chest, each one a story of sacrifice, spoke for him. The casket outside, draped in stars and stripes, spoke for him. Then the Marine stepped forward again, his voice sharper now, cutting across the growing crowd. "You talk about protocol," he said, his tone heavy with contempt, "but I have walked through this same system for decades, and I know when protocol is being used as a shield, this is not security. This is discrimination. Call it what it is." The murmurs became words. The words became chants. Short, sharp. Let him fly. Let him fly the counter. Agent looked terrified, her eyes flicking toward the cameras, her fingers frozen over the keyboard. The supervisor returned at last, but he was not alone. Beside him walked a man in a navy suit, polished shoes, a clipped badge on his pocket. His posture, quick, sharp, controlled like someone accustomed to cleaning up disasters, his voice carried smooth authority. "Colonel Carter," he said, "we apologize sincerely for the inconvenience. There seems to have been a miscommunication." Carter turned his head slowly, his expression unreadable. "A miscommunication," he repeated the word, flat, controlled. "Yes, sir," the man replied with a practiced smile. "We are already correcting it. We would like to personally escort you to the gate and upgrade you to first-class accommodations." Etude. Crowd reacted with low scoffs, some shaking their heads, some muttering too little too late. The Marine snorted softly, arms crossed. Carter stayed still, his voice calm, measured. "If no one recorded this, if no one spoke up, would I still be standing?" Here denied the man in the suit, hesitated, cleared his throat, searched for words he could not say. The silence that followed was louder than any chant. The passengers knew the answer. The staff knew the answer. Carter knew the answer. It was not about error. It was about exposure. The man in the suit tried again. "Sir, we want to make this right." Carter's reply was simple. "Respect is not a luxury, it is a duty, and tonight that duty was denied. Not to me, but to the soldier I escort." The words landed, heavy in the room, and every phone captured them for the world outside. The crowd pressed closer, their phones raised higher, each screen a window to the outside world where the story was no longer confined to a single gate in a single airport. It was already spilling across feeds, timelines, and live streams, people scrolling at home, gasping, typing, sharing hashtags, forming in real time. The uniformed man at the counter becoming a symbol before their eyes. Carter stood like stone, his presence steady, while the airline representative in the Navy suit shifted uncomfortably under the weight of dozens of lenses. The Marine veteran gave a small shake of his head, his voice low but sharp. "This is already out there," he said. "The world is watching, and you cannot walk this back with an upgrade to first class." Passengers murmured in agreement. A woman near the windows held up her phone, showing the screen to those around her. The headline already spreading, "U.S. Army Colonel denied boarding while escorting fallen soldier." Another man added, "It is on Twitter. It is everywhere now." The counter agent bit her lip, her eyes darting toward the back as if hoping someone else would appear to take responsibility. The supervisor rubbed the back of his neck, sweat beading at his temple. The suit tried again. "Sir, please allow us to resolve this quietly." Carter met his gaze quietly, firmly. "You cannot resolve quietly what you chose to humiliate loudly." The words sent a ripple through the crowd. Quiet. Gasps, murmurs, nods of approval. Carter was not raising his voice, but the truth carried louder than any shout. Then security appeared, a younger officer in an airport uniform, his face pale, his hand holding a phone. He passed it to the man in the suit, who scrolled, his expression shifting from polished control to strained panic. The Marine leaned forward. "What is it?" The officer hesitated, then said softly, "A major news outlet has already published the story." The man in the suit closed his eyes for the briefest moment before straightening. Adjusting his tie, he forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Colonel, we will of course allow you to board immediately," he said, but Carter interrupted the choice of words, striking like a blade. "Allow me," he said quietly but firmly, "I am not here seeking permission. I am here fulfilling a duty." The passengers erupted in murmurs, nodding their agreement, some clapping softly, the sound growing into scattered applause. The suit froze, caught between damage, control, and the undeniable reality that this moment was no longer his. To spin, Carter adjusted his hat, his shoulders square, his presence unshaken. The mission was unchanged. Jason Reynolds still waited outside, draped in the flag, and Carter would see him home. The airline might scramble, the news might explode, but the soldier would not be left behind. And for the crowd watching phones, raised hearts pounding, they understood they were no longer just witnesses. They were part of the record part, of the accountability part of the truth that would not be buried under the word policy. The atmosphere inside the terminal felt heavier than the air outside on the tarmac. It was no longer just a flight delay or an argument at a counter. It was a standoff between respect and prejudice. The Marine folded his arms, eyes locked on the airline representative who looked smaller by the second, while passengers whispered, filmed, and typed their outrage into phones that connected this one moment to the entire country. Then the crowd shifted as a new figure entered. Moving with quiet authority, a man in a dark suit carrying himself with the unmistakable posture of someone who had worn the uniform himself. His ID badge flashed briefly, Department of the Army Major Thomas Beckett. He stepped forward, extending his hand to Carter Colonel. He said firmly, "We have been informed of the situation." Carter gripped his hand, steady, strong. No words wasted. Beckett turned toward the airline staff. His voice crisp, sharp, without hesitation. "Colonel Carter and the remains of Private First Class Jason Reynolds will not be flying commercial." He said, "The Pentagon has arranged a private military flight. Your involvement here is over." The airline representative opened his mouth to protest, but Beckett's eyes cut to him like a blade. "This will be addressed," he said simply, and the man fell silent. The passengers murmured the weight of the military stepping in, carrying more authority than any apology. The Marine let out a quiet, satisfied grunt, nodding at Carter. "We look out for our own," he said. Carter returned the nod, his eyes steady as mission back on course. The phones caught every second. The comments online surged, hashtags multiplying the story no longer. Just trending, but dominating feeds. Military organizations issuing statements, veteran groups demanding accountability, even political leaders weighing in with sharp words about respect and duty. But Carter did not smile. He did not gloat. This was never about him. He glanced toward the windows where the casket rested unseen by most, but never forgotten by him. Jason Reynolds, young, 21 years old, waiting to go home to a family that would receive him with broken hearts. Carter adjusted, his hat, his voice low, steady. "Major, let us finish the mission." Beckett nodded, leading him away from the counter past the murmurs, past the cameras, past the stunned silence of airline employees who realized too late the cost of their choices. The crowd parted respectfully, some saluting, some placing hands over hearts. The Marine gave one last nod of approval and whispered, "God bless you." Colonel Carter walked forward each step, measured every movement, a reminder that dignity is not given, it is carried. And tonight it was carried by him for the fallen soldier who could no longer walk himself. Behind him, the airline scrambled, but the damage was done. The story had broken free of the terminal walls and no press release could contain it. Now, outside the terminal, the air was cooler, the engines of distant planes humming, the ground crews moving. With quiet precision, Carter walked alongside Major Beckett toward the private hangar, where the military transport waited, its silver body gleaming under the floodlights, the flag-draped casket already secured, with care soldiers standing at attention. Their salutes, sharp, crisp, filled with the weight of silence. Carter paused for a moment, letting the sight settle into him. The mission was still heavy, but now it was back in his hands as it should have been. He touched the brim of his hat, a small gesture of respect, then followed Beckett up the steps into the aircraft. The cabin smelled of leather and steel, the kind of space designed for function. Not comfort, Carter did not need comfort. He needed assurance that Private Reynolds would reach home without further indignity. Meanwhile, back in the terminal, the airline reeled passengers buzzing with disbelief, anger, and something deeper, a recognition that they had witnessed a moment where truth was undeniable. The Marine gave a short statement to those who gathered near him, saying what many felt, that no soldier should ever be treated like that, not in uniform, not while carrying the burden of a fallen brother. His words spread through the live streams already echoing across social media news. Networks picked it up within the hour, anchors repeating the story with graphics, bold headlines, military groups releasing their own statements, condemning the airline hashtags climbing into the top ranks, calls for boycott rising faster than any spokesperson could counter the airline attempted damage control, calling it a misunderstanding, issuing apologies, but the public did not buy it. Too many had seen too much. The footage spoke louder than any press release. By the end of the week, the airline's stock had dipped, analysts citing reputational damage, advocacy groups filed complaints, politicians demanded hearings. The company's CEO appeared on camera, his words hollow-strained as he spoke of regret and retraining programs. But no one forgot the sight of Colonel Carter standing tall at the counter being told no, for no reason other than prejudice cloaked in procedure. And yet Carter did not stay to watch the fallout. He was in another city by then, walking beside grieving parents as they received their son's remains. He stood at attention while the flag was folded and handed to a trembling mother. He offered a salute, not for cameras, not for applause, but for duty, for Jason Reynolds, who would never walk again. Carter carried no bitterness, he carried responsibility. The crowd at the funeral spoke softly of dignity, of sacrifice, of honor. None of them mentioned the airport, but Carter knew the memory lingered not just for him, but for every person who had seen it unfold. Respect should never require a spotlight. He thought it should be the standard weeks past. Yet the echoes of that night at the airport did not fade. The story traveled further than Carter ever imagined. Headlines in major newspapers, documentaries. On morning shows, panels debating how such a thing could happen in a country that prides itself on honoring its service members. It was no longer just an isolated incident. It had become a symbol, a mirror held up to a nation forced to see what it often tried to look away from. The airline continued its struggle. Every statement, every press release scrutinized lawsuits filed by advocacy groups demanding accountability. Board members pressed leadership for answers. Stockholders demanded explanations. But the truth was already etched into the public memory. You cannot erase the sight of injustice once it is burned into the eyes of millions. Carter, however, did not chase the headlines. He returned to his duties, quiet, steady, unshaken by the noise. His concern remained with the families of soldiers, with the men and women who served with dignity, expecting the same. In return, in his mind, the lesson was clear. Respect cannot be conditional. It cannot depend on whether cameras are recording it. Must exist in silence when no one is watching. One evening. Weeks later, Carter stood in front of a group of young recruits, their uniforms still stiff, their faces open, eager, uncertain. He did not tell them about the airport directly. He did not need to. Instead, he asked them a simple question. What do you believe your uniform means? Some answered courage, some said sacrifice. One whispered respect. Carter nodded slowly. All of those are true, he said. But remember this. Your uniform does not protect you from prejudice. It does not erase ignorance. What it does is give you a responsibility to carry yourself with dignity, even when others do not. The room fell silent, the recruits hanging on his every word. He continued, one day, you may find yourself in a moment where respect is denied, where you are underestimated or dismissed. Do not lose your composure. Stand firm. Remember who you represent and know. This respect is not a gift. Respect is earned by living your duty with honor. The recruits nodded, their faces solemn. Carter let the silence linger before offering one final line. Never let anyone forget that behind the uniform is a human being, The applause that followed was quiet, respectful, not thunderous, but heartfelt. And in that sound, Carter heard the promise of change, the kind that begins not in headlines, but in hearts. The world had seen what happened when an airline chose racism over respect, and though the damage to the company would play out in courts and in boardrooms, the greater lesson was carried in the minds of those who watched, who recorded, who spoke up that night. Justice is not a destination. It is a choice, one that belongs to every witness, every voice, every person willing to say this is wrong, and I will not be silent. This story made you pause if it made you think about dignity, about justice, about the weight of silence, then let it not end here. Share your thoughts in the comments and let your voice be part of this conversation, because every voice matters, and silence only protects the guilty. And if you believe stories like this must be told, if you want to hear more about truth resilience and the fight for respect, then hit the like button and subscribe to this channel together. We will keep shining a light on the moments the world must never ignore,